Mrs. Anita Wills is related to the Nanzatico tribe that I told you guys about before, which were all put on trial for killing Englishmen, but they were put on trial and all sentenced to enslavement for the adults and indentured servitude for the children, including babies. Yes, these people put little babies in slavery, basically, in bondage. Chama Wengapo. Today we're going to discuss the book Along the Rappahannock River by Anita Wills. And also Genealogy, Free People of Color, Indentured Servitude, Enslavement among the tribes, and Indigenous American heritage. So grab your pen and your pad and let's start digging, turtles. Please share, like, and subscribe, and comment below any suggestions or what you think about the video. And I've lived in this area for a long time, so checking out this part. Look at the trails. They had like a little birthday party over there behind me. So it looks like they're doing some work over here. You can just see what type of the difference of this forest over here compared to the one on the other side. Other side of town. This one you can see like the jungle vines, like a jungle-like vines. I don't know what you call that in the woodlands. I don't know what you call those vines in the woodlands. Hope y'all can see it. See if I can zoom in. See the vines? Remember they had vines like that in Georgia. We used to swing on them across the little creek when we were little. But yeah, so I'm trying to find the creek, or whatever it is they have over here. I know I saw a little opening over there, but it was kind of like too cliff-like, so I came over here to do my tobacco prayer real quick. But then I saw that it was a whole bunch of park out here to explore. So, but yeah, today I really wanted to talk about, of course we're going to talk about genealogy. And there's this book by Anita Wills I told y'all about a couple times on here. That's going to help some of y'all who have genealogy in the Virginia area, specifically around the Rappahannock River. The book is called Along the Rappahannock River. And Mrs. Anita Wills is related to the Nanzatico tribe that I told you guys about before, which were all put on trial for killing Englishmen. I think it was the man and his son. I can't remember specifically, but they were put on trial and all sentenced to enslavement for the adults and indentured servitude for the children, including babies. Yes, these people put little babies in slavery, basically, in bondage. So how can you have indentured servitude? You have a contract that you actually sign. In slavery, you have a bond that you do not sign, but other parties sign on your behalf because you are their property. Indentured servitude, not servitude. Indentured servitude is not that much difference. But the fact that you have an actual contract with a time limit and you're supposed to sign off on that contract. You're supposed to be a willing participant. But these people put infants on indentured servitude contracts until they were 21 years old. They did not sign those. So we see right there, we know they're doing illegal stuff, or they did illegal stuff. It is not modern day times. Okay, that was back in the what was it, the late 1600s, early 1700s that they did that. Now, we're not that far from there. Not sure how many miles, but it's in driving distance. Oh, okay, I'm gonna show y'all in a second. This is Nabisco Boardwalk. It's just opened. It's beautiful. Hold on, let me show you. Try to go over here in the boardwalk and not get people on camera so y'all can see. You can see it's like a wetlands over here. All right. It's like vast fields of wetlands. You can tell the indigenous people had bean, I don't know what you call those, bean groves or patches, bean patch, I don't know. They grew beans and probably, oh yeah, this cattail. You see those cattails, those long stems with the brown thing at the top? Look, a turtle. But look, it's this vast fields out here. Let me see if I can zoom in for y'all. It's beautiful out here. And I got off track. I was talking about the babies. Oh, illegal indenture. That's what I was talking about. Y'all see that? Isn't that beautiful? I might have to take a picture. The birds. They swarming something. Something must be dead over there. Can't smell anything. But you see those things? Lily pads. People used to grow like beans. Tuckahoe. Let me switch it back around. They used to have beans and tuckahoe and those type of water, like close to the water. Like I said, cat's tail. All those things were used as food. People ate cat's tail as food. Cat's tail was also medicine as well. It's an anesthetic, what? Anesthetic or whatever, antiseptic, I'm sorry. It's also used as a numbing, for surgeries and things. People use it for toothaches, any type of intense pain. They use the cat's tail for that. So it has healing properties as well as pain relief properties, just like they use like willow's bark, which is now called aspirin. All right, so anyways, let's back to the indentured. Yeah, so that's an illegal indenture. Infants cannot legally agree to signing any type of contract, just like your birth certificate. You as an infant did not agree to sign the birth certificate. Maybe your parents might have agreed to it. But definitely your parents, especially if they were shipped away, like the Nanzatico's case, they were shipped away to Antigua as slaves. They did not sign off on a contract for indenture for the children. Now, some people did sign off indentured contracts dealing with taxes. A family might be poor and be behind with taxes, so they were sign a contract to indenture their child out to someone, and they would teach them a trade like a blacksmith or doctor or a store owner, some type of farmer. Those people would, also in exchange, the child would get educated and they would learn a trade. So for the parents, it wasn't such a bad thing to indenture your child because you would be paying off your taxes, as well as basically send your child to school to gain a skill so they'll be able to work after their indenture is up, if they were ever left out of their indenture. Sorry, let me keep moving. There's a lot of people out here. But yeah, so that's some things that they do not tell you about indentured servitude and slavery. And this book here by Anita Wills, she goes into it about her own ancestry. Right, Anita Wills is a melanated woman, looks like me. She's not, quote unquote, looking like a native, but all of her family were indigenous people here. So she goes, I'm gonna break, sorry, there's people walking behind me. But yeah, I'm gonna get in more into that and break it down, because I have like a whole bunch of pages marked off on here. Y'all know I'm a nerd, so I got all these pages marked off. So I'm gonna go into it some more so you guys will know a little bit more about the book. Book is on Amazon, you can purchase it yourself. But it really is, it's showing you the ties between the indigenous people. And it will make more sense for those of you that don't understand, those people who look like me or other people who are claiming to be indigenous Americans, and what connection. Because this here ties in the free people of color, it ties in slavery, all those people. So how can Antigua have a whole tribe enslaved? And y'all know what people in Antigua look like. They do not look like Geronimo and all of them. They look like you and me. So this book kind of ties all those things in. It's not a long read. You can, super speed readers, y'all can read that in a weekend, a little Saturday evening. You can read it, but it's good to have the reference points. She has a lot of good sources in the book. She's, been to the courthouses. She has primary source documents that are referenced in the book. Okay. Oh, let me zoom in on some cat's tails so y'all can see what I'm talking about. Let's see if I can get closer without getting folks on camera. Hold on. See all those long stem plants with the black long, is that black? No, that's like a dark brown long bulbs at the top. Those are cat's tails. There's a whole bunch of them. So the people used to come by the water and they would cut off the top part and use that as medicine. Like I said, someone gets wounded or shot or something, shot with an arrow, they would put, they would use cat's tails, and they would even use cranberry juice to heal it. It sounds crazy, but that's what they used. Cranberries have healing properties that people don't even understand today. All right, so there's a lot of simple herbal medicine that we could still be using today. Now, I know y'all not gonna jump into this whatever you want to call this swamp, marsh, and be picking cat's tails, so y'all can just use the store-bought stuff. Okay. So like I said, I found a spot to sit because it's too much walking out there. So I'm about to get into the book right now so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Hold on. So Mrs. Wills, she goes in to talk about, she has other ancestry which are in Pennsylvania and other areas, like South Carolina. So one of the things right here on page 11, she talks about her paternal lines. And she said, in 2005, my brother Anthony Baxter took a DNA test, and the paternal results were 100% Native American from Colombia, South America. 100%. Does that make it? If you can see what Miss Anita Wills looks like, she looks like she can be my auntie or something. She does not look like the people you see on Hollywood movies, correct? And we're like the same complexion almost. So her brother, with DNA, the paternal lines can only be done with the males in your family. So basically, on her paternal line, it's 100% American Indian from South America. The people here migrated, and this is what a lot of those DNA tests do not put in mind when they're doing them, the migration patterns of people. So the people who are currently in that area might not have been from the area in the first place. All right? All right. So I really want to dive into what she's saying about the Nansantico and her ancestry there. All right. Chapter 2, this is when she starts going into the Nanzatico. And she says the Nansantico, let's see, y'all can see me read. It's hard to hold it up. The Nansantico, okay. Let's see. She's just basically going in to the people of the area. When the Jamestown settlers arrived in Virginia in 1607, the region had been occupied by natives for thousands of years, and they were living on the land called Pamasawo, which meant the world and everything in it. They also called it Ajakan or Senecomico. There's different names. The forest covered most of the land, and there were many different Indian tribes in the region. There was no Virginia, Maryland, or North Carolina. It was all one area, and the tribal boundaries were set and respected. As colonial settlers came to the region, they encroached on and took over traditional tribal lands. The lands were divided into states, just as they were dividing countries in Africa according to their needs. So she's putting some truth here. She goes on to talk about Virginia tribes were the eastern woodland tribes. Each of these Indian language groups held different beliefs and traditions and customs. So she's talking about the Algonquins, the Sioux, and the Iroquoian people. Right. Okay. And then she goes further down, talking about the Rappahannock tribes. They lived, along the Rappahannock River, which is the title of the book, and it included the Nanzatico people. All right. They depended on the rivers for transportation, for water, cooking, bathing, and food. So the water was necessary to the ecosystem of the people. It was necessary to the trading and the commerce of the people and the livelihood. Travel, people used the rivers to travel. They didn't travel as much on foot. Now we have what they call runners. So people, the fastest people who, like people nowadays would be like Usain Bolt, these track stars. Those people their job would be the messengers or the runners. We didn't have text messages. We had people messages. So if you wanted to send a message to the town over, you would hire a runner, or, if you're the chief, the runner already works for you. You hire the runner and they'll send the message. They have to remember. See, these people have to be intelligent, they have to have good memory, and they have to be physically in good shape. So they would just literally run from one town to the other passing messages, right? And sometimes they would announce people's arrival or their call. Before phones, when someone came to your house unexpected, which most people did because there's no way to inform you beforehand unless you had a runner, okay? So those runners would come in town and tell you, oh, the chief from Nanzatico chief is in town, or the team is coming here, the Warriors are coming here to play a game of chunky or whatever sports that we had. So back then sports I digress, but sports was a big event like it is now in America. And all America did was take our former cultural events and create them into sporting events in the likeness of the Roman events. So they mixing the Roman cathedral type of Colosseum, like the stadiums, and then they're mixing the actual sport, which was our indigenous sports. Okay, but I'm off subject. Anyways, let's go into what I was talking about with the Nansantico. It's hard to flip through the books like this. She talks about the American Indian slavery as well, like I was speaking beforehand. And if you know the history of the American Indian slavery, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, us being indigenous, would make more sense to you, right? All the slaves were not Africans, right? There's a large domestic slave trade which involved American Indians, and legally a lot of those were from the Indian Wars, which there were many of them. They try to act like we didn't fight, but there were many of indigenous wars. The most famous is the French and Indian War. That was really against Europeans, but Iroquois jumped on side, the English side, and I believe the Algonquins were on the French side. So, you know, we're kind of mixed in that, but it wasn't like the French against the Indians, like the title is referencing. But anyways, so she says Native American slavery is a piece of history of slavery that has been glossed over. Very true. Between 1492 and 1880, between 2 and 5.5 million Native Americans were enslaved in the Americas, in addition to 12.5 million Africans. Okay. I'll say this, with the African numbers, a lot of those people were recycled slaves. So you can't really, even if they came from the African ports, you can't really for certain say that those people were Native Africans. Africans had their own slave trade going over there for a long time. They had people from Europe as slaves, pale and melanated Europeans as slaves. They had American Indians as slaves over there. People from the Middle East and Asia, all types of slaves were there. In West Africa, it was mostly foreign people. People from other parts of Africa, people from, like I said, those other places, from other continents that were enslaved there. And they were all shipped out the same. They didn't care where these slaves came from, as long as it wasn't their tribe, right? And that's not to say that everyone was involved in it. It was mostly the royal families, and the majority of the people were not royal. So if you go back and look and research the history of West Africa, you will see that 3/4 of the people were in some type of slave or servitude to those royal families. The royal families didn't care about sending away people that wasn't them. So it was only certain tribes that were on top over there. And then the wars that they had with the Europeans and each other kind of changed that. But I'm digressing again, because we're talking about the Nanzatico and the Rappahannock and those tribes over there. So on the next page, she goes on to say, the enslavement of the Nansantico is an example of Indians being sold into slavery in Virginia. This is what happened to the Nansantico people in 1704. Okay, so 1704. I keep forgetting the date, but anyways. They were the first entire tribe enslaved, and one of the tribes that I'm descended from through my ancestors, Indian Charles, or Charles Sr., and his son, Charles Lewis. So she's a direct descendant of Indian Charles. This is one instance that we have in which a tribe was essentially eliminated because of a conflict here. A small party of Nanzatico Indians were accused of the killing of an English family, and as a result of a long-standing dispute, the Nanzatico was impunged to give up the killers, and that the killers were convicted in English court and hanged. But the General Assembly also decided that the entire nation could be retaliated against because of what these men had done. All right, so, and then she puts the reference from K, I can't pronounce this, Sylvaland, the enslavement in Virginia, right? So they passed a ruling to enslave the entire population of the Nansantico except for children who were under 12. The entire tribe was sold into slavery to Antigua in the West Indies. The Nansantico complained to the governor of Virginia that an English claimant to their land south of the river had broken down their fences and turned them off their land, while the rest of their land on both sides of the river was claimed by the Lomaxes. They wanted new land. The government considered the matter, but they didn't act. Inaction may have prompted the Rowley's homicide. Okay, so basically in court, the Nanzatico said the reason this stuff happened is because the people basically breached the contract that the Nanzatico had with the Virginia government, right? So they had broke down the fences that the Nanzatico put up to keep people off their reserved land on both sides of it. So these two families, the Lomaxes and the Rowleys, were the ones who were involved, and that probably prompted whoever went out and murdered these people. Okay, so they had a reason for doing these things. It wasn't like people were just, they wouldn't have signed a treaty if they're going to go around savagely killing English people. It doesn't make sense, right? All right, so after they filed the complaint was not heard in Essex County. Nanzatico claimed that Dr. John Lomax, the grandson of Thomas Lunsford, who had the patent for the Portabago land in Virginia, had taken the rest of their property and a clear indication that he had seized their legally allotted land bordering Portabago Bay. That's not that far from where I'm at right now. Then the Nanzatico filed a claim against Kendall and Lomax, and they asked to be assigned some new acreage, a matter that the council agreed to consider, and as it turned out, the council failed to act in time, and a group of natives attacked the Richmond County home of John Raleigh, and several English people were slain. A young girl who survived the attack described it to the authorities. So the girl that they did not kill told on them and told everything that happened. All right. So a lot of this stuff is coming around the Bacon's Rebellion time and all this, suspicion. This is after the Powhatan Wars, and everyone had signed these treaties to be cool. And it doesn't look like it didn't happen. So they end up enslaving whole tribes. Now, the enslavement of the Nansantico set the stage for the enslavement of many other tribes that we've never even heard of in history. So a whole bunch of tribes that we will never know. A whole bunch of languages gone. These people became the descendants of slaves. All right? So you got to ask these ADOS people. And I keep talking about ADOS. There's no offense to them, but they're mostly talking about people being Africans. There's a whole bunch of descendants of slaves who were not Africans. So what about the descendants of these Nansantico and all these other tribes that were enslaved during the many Indian wars here? And then there's a lot of people illegally enslaved. They would just come to villages and raid people. So this is why a lot of people signed these treaties and converted to Christianity and wanted to become a part of this Western civilization for protection from these raids and slaveries. The Seneca, or the otherwise known as the Mingo tribes, they played a major part in enslaving these people, right, during the raids up in this area. The Westos was another tribe that did that. And when the Westo did it, they ended up They enslaved people, and they did it really good for a long time because they had a lot of firepower. They had bought a lot of guns. And then eventually the people turned on them, and then they as a tribe got enslaved or killed off. So, that was kind of I guess, since they took the English to not the English, the other indigenous people took karma in their own hand, and they somehow defeated the Westos, right? I believe that's the Tuscarora that had a part in that. So it's a lot of stuff that they don't talk about. A lot of how can you leave 5.5 million people out of this mix, and how do you know all of those 12 million that they're saying are African were not part of these indigenous tribes? And this is just from North America. Imagine all the people from Brazil and all these. She has ancestry from Colombia, South America, not Colombia, South Carolina, Colombia, South America, who ended up in South Carolina. Imagine all those people. So where do their descendants come? How come none of when they show us slaves, how come none of them look like Geronimo and the crying Indian on TV? They don't look like Tonto and all that, right? the people are that you read the journals of these planters. I'll call them planters because they're not masters. You read the journal of the planters, and they describe the people as Negroes. They describe all their slaves as Negroes. There's no way that they're going to describe all their slaves as Negroes or the European indentured servants, which were basically slaves, because most of them did not get out of their contracts. How are they only describing these people as this way? You know what I'm saying? There's clues when you read the primary sources, and she gives a lot of them because she got a lot of this information. The stuff about the attack on the John Rowley family, it's in the Richmond County Order Book number 4. So these are available, especially if you live on the East Coast. In the South, you'll have access to a lot of these books, especially if you live in North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, South Carolina. And they even have books further north because nobody talks about the slaves, the slaves that live up north or the free people of color. All right. So Indian Charles, when they rounded up this family of the Nanzatico, I'm going into the next chapter. Indian Charles was the son of 2 of the Nansantico tribal members. So Indian Charles was indentured to a planter named John Lewis in 1704. And he was judged to be 5 years old and too young to be sold before the courts to Antigua, to the Caribbean, West Indies. So he's had to stay and get indentured in Virginia along the Rappahannock River, right? So he continued living on the Lewis plantation to complete his indenture. And he had his sons, Ambrose and Charles Lewis. So his sons would be Nanzatico as well, because those were his sons. They were Nanzatico by blood. The wife was listed as a mulatto. She's not really sure exactly what tribe or what she was. But in Virginia, most of the times, indigenous people were listed as mulatto and sometimes even Negro or black. But she was listed as mulatto, and she doesn't know anything about the tribal affiliation, if she was Indigenous American or mixed African. She's not sure. So. But anyways, the thing with Indian Charles, and even though he was a child, the older children were banned from even visiting other reservations or any Indian towns. They were not allowed to associate legally. They did these things so people would lose their identity, lose their language. They weren't allowed to speak the language. And we know a lot of Pan-Africans ask us why your ancestors didn't speak the language. A lot of people legally couldn't, especially if you were indentured or enslaved, you legally couldn't visit Indian towns. You couldn't practice your culture. You couldn't learn your culture. You couldn't speak your language. You couldn't have indigenous names. His name was Charles. They changed his name to Charles. They don't know what his real name was. Right? He couldn't legally visit any towns, any Indian towns. And so his kids were listed as mulattoes in the courts. And they were indentured to Mr. Bruckner and King George County courts. So she has all these court records. All this stuff is not hidden knowledge. It's in the court records. We just have to read books. We have to dig. We have to get insightful about, suggestions. There's a lot of people who thinking that they're purely African, and they have not explored their indigenous heritage because they don't know this information. They don't know to look for these things. Now, these 2 young men were seamen in 1774 during the Revolutionary War. So they fought in the Revolutionary War, right? They never talk in these history books at your school or on TV in these movies. They never talk about the people of color who fought in these wars. This was when these boys had gained their freedom from their own indentured. Because they were born to indentured servants, they were also indentured, right? Because like I told y'all earlier, poor people couldn't pay taxes. They couldn't afford to pay the taxes, so they were indentured their children, and that way their children will gain some type of skills. So I guess these guys had enough skills to be seamen for King George County, right? So she just goes on and on about her ancestry, dealing with this tribe. Oh, this is where she talks about the adults that were sold into servitude with the Nanzatico tribe. They were prohibited from returning to Virginia thereafter, and while the children under 12 were bonded out to Virginia Englishmen until the age of 24, after which they were prohibited from visiting any Indian town. So they were detribalized, basically. And that's the process that they used on many of the tribes here. That's exactly what happened here. But of course, when they became free peoples of color. And they were all reclassified to mulattoes. She says natives who were not assimilated and or accepted as white were stripped, declared Negro, mulatto, colored, and eventually black. Free persons of color, mulattoes or coloreds, comprised a insignificant part of the makeup of Fredericksburg before the 1800s and were not considered a threat. And when their numbers began to increase, the laws were passed to control their movements. Certificates and registry of free Negroes for the city of Fredericksburg were required from 1790 through 1862. And this happened in many areas, and you'll notice that the 1790 is when they started to go back and record people, and, make records and kind of formalize the nation. This is after the Revolutionary War and such. And a lot of stuff from there, has been changed. They have been destroyed. But there does remain some registries and things that you can find in these courthouses. But you have to go there. You're not going to find a lot of this stuff on Ancestry. You're not. All right. So she talks about there was laws requiring that all free Negroes and mulatto had to register in 1793. So before it wasn't a requirement, but in 1793, that's when it was legally required. Registration was required every 3 years in most counties. I hope y'all can hear me. Age, name, color, and stature by whom in which the court said Negro or mulatto was emancipated, or that such Negro or mulatto was born free. So right there, you see that some people were formerly enslaved or indentured, and that other peoples were born free. Most registration records included the registrant's name, age, height, marks, or scars, and some included the name of the parents. So for those who are looking for genealogy, trying to find the parents of some of these ancestors back in the 1800s, late 1700s. Some of these registries might give you some clues about it, and then they'll give you like a physical description of the person. So they might be like short, dark complexion, scars on their forehead or something like that. Because I've seen many registers say these things, and then they might put their parents, like the parents was John Oglesby or whatever. I'm just making up a name. Virginia kept excellent records during the colonial period, some of which are still available. They came up with the racial integrity laws against race mixing. However, the race mixing was predominantly through white males and Native or African women. By and large, the children were treated like lesser human beings and were blamed for the sins of the father. None of the laws punished the white males for race mixing, which makes sense when you understand that white males wrote the laws. For instance, in 1705, Henning's statutes at large stated the definition of a mulatto is the child of an Indian the child and grandchild of a great grandchild. Wait a minute. Let me do it over again. The definition of a mulatto is the child of an Indian, the child, grandchild, or great grandchild of a Negro. Okay? So either the child has an Indian parent, or they have a parent which is Negro, or they have a grandparent that's Negro, or a great grandparent that is Negro. But also they're mixing up things because Negroes were Indians as well. A Negro could be African as well. So what is a Negro? Right? What is an Indian? These are just these terms, you know, they get confusing. What is a mulatto? And then sometimes mulatto, like I said, in the case you see of Indian Charles, he was listed as a mulatto, but clearly his name was Indian Charles. Both his parents were from the Nanzatico tribe. All right, this statement essentially wiped out the designation of Indian as a racial classification. Racial identities were determined by census takers, eyeballing each person. All right. Okay, while documenting our Lewis lines, most of the available documentation listed Charles and Ambrose as mulattoes. The truth is the racial classification was changed from native or Indian to mulatto in the census records. Charles and Ambrose Lewis and their father, Indian Charles, were Nansantico Indians. The maternal lines through my grandmother, Leah Ruth Martin, are the descendants of the Nansantico Nation. So y'all see the mess that was made here. These people were specifically targeted, and their ancestry was scrambled and changed, reclassified. So she goes on and on about another ancestor. You know, it gets over. When you really think about it, it's really upsetting that they would do this to people. It really is. All right. Oh, she also goes into the period in Virginia where they tried to limit the interactions between Africans and American Indians. Okay, she said at one point mixing between Africans and Native Americans was common. The court cases revealed that individuals were considered black until they were proved that they were Indian. This was due to the proximity to the natives and Africans acceptance of people based on character and not of race. So different people were accepted in tribes, and if you were on a plantation with a bunch of Africans, as an indigenous person, you were accepted as one of them. People didn't really go upon those, you know. If the person was cool and they fit in with everyone, you fit in, just like today in our community. One of the intentions of classifying natives as mulatto was to create a division between natives and Africans. It is another example of divide and conquer that was between somewhat effective. That has been somewhat effective. In the early 20th century, when the eugenics movement took hold at the University of Virginia, which a lot of people don't know, a campaign was launched to introduce that would end the confusion of racial classification. They went so far to sterilize natives and Negro women. The reason given was that they were feeble-minded and should not procreate. And this was under the direction of Planned Parenthood's founders, Dr. Margaret Sanger. Sorry. Why am I talking about Margaret Thatcher? That's somebody else. Dr. Margaret Sanger. It is ironic that the University of Virginia would be taking on the eugenics movement since the founder was Thomas Jefferson. Okay, this is a quote she has in here. This is coming from Written Out of History, Contemporary Native American Narratives of Enslavement by Marx Karaki. Anthropology Today in June 2009, Volume 25, Issue 3. Dr. Walter Plecker, who was appointed in 1918 as the director of the Bureau of Vital Statistics, made it one of his primary motives to show that anyone who tried to say that they were Indian was merely a mongrel or color part person who was trying to become white by virtue of declaring themselves to be Indian. Plecker changed the records of Virginia Indians that were recorded as Indian to say that they were colored. And he did this on the birth certificates, marriage certificates, on death certificates, and on any legal records that he could get his hand on. To solidify this tribal government and a fight for state recognition, the Rappahannock tribe incorporated in 1921. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. These tribes are corporations. These tribes are legal entities. They're corporate entities. They're corporations. They're nonprofits. All right. This is what these governments had to do to protect themselves legally. But like other Virginia Indian groups, the tribes struggled to preserve its identity and culture early on in the 20th century. The Racial Integrity Act of 1924 and subsequent legislation banned interracial marriage in Virginia and asked for voluntary racial identifications on birth certificates and marriage certificates. White was identified as having no trace of African ancestry, while all other people, including Indians, were defined as colored. All right, so a lot of this reclassification happened recently. You see, this is in 1924. Before that, a lot of these people who are now called Black or African American were listed as Indians. You know, at least they self-identified as Indians or colored. They were forced to be called colored on the record. So everyone who was not considered white was considered colored. You could not go by your tribal identification. You couldn't, have any other type of ethnicity. You're all just colored folks. All right. And there was only one exception, and it's for those elite Virginians who claimed Pocahontas and John Rolfe as their ancestors. And the law allowed for those with 1/16 or less blood of American Indian and no other non-Caucasian blood to be deemed as white persons. So it's for the mixed people of Pocahontas and John Rolfe ancestry. A lot of those nowadays are considered Caucasian people, a lot of those descendants. And many of those people did not even know that they're descended from Pocahontas. So a lot of them are reclaiming that identity as well, which is fine because they really are of their blood and that's really their ancestor. But you can't discriminate against other people who might be more of that bloodline and saying that those people are fake or those people don't belong. So y'all should be including everybody. I'm just saying. The laws essentially erased Virginia Indians as a category of people under the law. The U.S. Supreme Court declared the Racial Integrity Act unconstitutional in the Loving v. Virginia, 1967. Okay, so when the Loving v. Virginia case happened, a lot of people don't know that Mrs. Loving is a Rappahannock Indian. She never claimed to be a Negro. She was very stern until she died that she was an Indian. But for that case to be passed, they needed civil rights help. They needed to go along with that agenda, which they used those lawyers. So she had to be considered a Negro. And just like I said earlier on, Negroes were Indians too, right? It was not just people of African descent who were considered Negroes. So all this stuff is jumbled up. It's all mixed up, as you see. We can get into more about it, but she has more good things in this book. Y'all can get the book along the Rappahannock. This is how look on my tabs. Look, I'm such a nerd. I got all these marked off. I just flip right through it for y'all. But she's talking about all these other tribes, and there's many other tribes, Choctaw, different groups of people who were sent away to the Caribbean and other places. right? Um, Portobagos were enslaved as well. I don't know if she really gets into it. She mentions them in here. Though different tribes around this area, the ones that really were not trying to sign these treaties or cooperate were raided by these tribes like the Westos, the group called the Longhouse, which are the 5 or 6 nations, depending on what time period, of the Iroquois. Those people had treaties and they had business deals with different groups. The French, well, they didn't really mess with the French as much as a certain period of time, but they had different business dealings with European groups. The Dutch, specifically, with the beaver and pelt trade, they made a lot of income with that, and they sold a lot of people to get whatever they needed, guns or whatever. So they would kill, you round up more, you sell people, you get guns, then you get more guns, and you can sell more people, you can raid more of your enemies. And it got to a point, I know I'm digressing again about the wars, but it has something to do with indigenous slavery and servitude. But it got to the point that the people were mixing with their enemies for protection or whatever. We know, some of us know, that the Iroquois and the Algonquin groups were fierce enemies for a long time. Siouans were kind of enemies with, they kind of sided with the Algonquins a lot of the time. They also had made their own enemies. These people, it got to the point, well, they were fighting each other to sell each other. They were killing each other. That's how everything got taken over, the blurred lines. They didn't consider, you think that everybody considered everybody their brother, that they're going to be fighting for their brother or whatever? They didn't consider those people them. They didn't consider them them. That's why they sold them off. And it's like, you're going to take advantage. If you clear off a certain tribe, in the case of Algonquins, a lot of them control the riverways. If you kill off a tribe like the Portobago, whatever, the tribe that was here in this area was the Nabisco. I think they were part of the Dogue chiefdom, or the Piscataway chiefdom. So then if you come over here where we're at, you saw how the water is here. The Nabisco town was right here. You killed them off. This is prime real estate for commerce. Like I told y'all, the riverways was the highways. That was the main highways. You travel by river more than you travel by road. And people still, like I said, the runners still travel by road, but they did most of their commerce because they could ship things with that. Now we had dog sleds or whatever, but they mostly used those in winter time. But you were going to use that river. You can load all your stuff on there, your skins or whatever. Later on, your enslaved people, your enemies, and you can sell them. Sell people down the river, So, but yeah, please share this out. Please like, subscribe, comment. Tell me what you think about it. Visiting these courthouses when you're doing genealogy is key too. If this woman wouldn't have visited these courthouses, she would not have found these ancestors that she found, and the information that she found about her ancestor, Indian Charles. People would have never known, because all the reclassifications, they would not have known who they were. Okay, so it's important, if you can, to travel to these places, to physically read, to learn cursive if you don't know cursive, so you can read these documents yourself, right? Because those are very important. People can tell you anything. They can type anything on these ancestry sites. And so it's good to look at it yourself, and then you're going to see more details that you didn't see before, right? I'm sorry, people keep walking through. It's kind of a busy time of the day. But yeah, keep searching, you guys. If you have any questions, y'all let me know. I'll tell y'all my email address is the TashaXi @gmail.com. THE, TashaXi. Don't know how to spell Tasha. TASHA, and the letters XI @gmail.com. So, you guys have any questions about anything? Y'all have any suggestions for any more different videos, let me know, y'all. Let me know, because I'm here for y'all, like whatever y'all need, you know. I'm just giving y'all the information that I learned from my research. So I gotta, you know, I'm a nerd. I gotta share my research with others. It gives me what do you call it? Gratification. It gives me gratification to share that information. So please like, subscribe, and share. It's very important that people get this information out to piece the puzzle together and make sense. I know a lot of y'all trying to reach out to family and friends that don't understand what you're talking about. The more you share these videos, the more they'll get the picture. And I'm breaking it down for you guys, dealing with the laws and the actual court documents. You will see what we're talking about. The more primary sources that you read, the more that you know. The more you understand the environment at the time, which is important when you do genealogy, because when you're looking at movies and things today, and even the textbook in these classes, they don't tell you a lot of things. So you're thinking, oh, like she found out these guys were seamen and, you know, they worked in the Navy on the ships during the Revolutionary War. If you're going by these textbooks, you would never think people of color would be in the Revolutionary War, but there was many of them. And you will see when you're looking up that people were collecting war pension for the Revolutionary War, people of color. All right, they weren't all in segregated regiments at that. They try to act like everyone, all this segregation and stuff, a lot of that came during Jim Crow. A lot of that came recently in the 1900s, right? Early 1900s, early to mid 1900s. Before that, people were not segregated. They did those things so other people and the immigrants who were coming in from Europe can gain a leverage over the indigenous people and the people of color who are already here. So that's a whole nother video. Y'all want to go into that? We can go into that too. But Chama Wagapa, y'all. Keep your hope alive. Keep searching, keep digging, turtles, okay? Keep digging.